Right. Ready, Piper. Commence their boy in on knee. Rolls. 1, 2. Ready, Pipers, the wearing of the green. Rolls. 1, 2. Ready, Pipers, Kelly the boy from Killan and the Sally Gardens. Rolls. 1, 2. Right, ready, fighters. Scotland the Brave and 20 men. Rolls. 1, 2. Ready, fighters. Midfield number 1 and wrap the green flag. Decon them now.
Yeah. Kelly the boy.
Right, ready, fighters. Kelly the boy from Callan and the Sally Gardens. Rolls. 1, 2.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I welcome you here to the official launch of the Siamsa programme for 2026. I want you all to join me in giving a round of applause to the midfield pipe band for setting the standard here tonight. This is part one of a part two special tribute night here tonight. So we're here to pay tribute to Peter Neary, who lost his life here back in 1922. This presentation and plaque commemoration has been done in the memory of the women of the revolutionary women of East Mayo and South Sligo from 1918 to 1923 project. I'm going to ask my fellow committee member Joe Millett to also say a few words here.
Ladies and gentlemen, as chairman of Síamsa Sráide, I'd just like to welcome you here this evening to this very poignant and very important unveiling. We can learn a hell of a lot about history. It teaches us most and much of what happened in our past. Some of it good, some of it not good, but most of it, all of it, very, very interesting. The story of the times of the 1920s and that, debatable whether it should have ever happened, but it did. We can't do anything about it. We have to ensure that it never happens again. But it's very important that the stories and the tales that were told around that time and events that happened are recorded. And thanks to the Mayo Genealogical Society and the Swinford Historical Society, led by Anne Leyden and her great comrades, tell us and have told us many, many stories of what happened around Swinford. There are other towns around that also have stories. In time, most of them, maybe never all of them, but most of them will be recorded. But we're here tonight to honour one particular man here, so I'm going to pass you over to Anne Leyden or whoever is next to tell you the story. Go away, good.
Thank you, Joe. I'd like to welcome you all here this evening. Just a few short words to tell you about how we found out about Peter Neary. It was in researching the revolutionary women from this town, and it was in the file in the Irish Military Archives, in the pension file of a lady called Nellie Campbell from Carabeg House, and she spoke in great detail about the burial of the boy Neary, she called him, who died near this spot during the capture of Swinford on August 2nd, 1922. And that's why we thought it was fitting for the Revolutionary Women of East Mayo and South Sligo project to erect this plaque in his memory. There's a few very important people and descendants of volunteers, men and women who were active on that day. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Bernie Henry. Bernie is over here. She is the daughter of Julia Tunney, and she is also the niece of Lieutenant Thomas McNicholas, who was killed in May 1923. Julia Tunney carried the petrol along with Mary O'Muelia to help burn down the National Army barracks. We also welcome Mairead Golden, grandniece of Nellie Campbell, and Porrick Campbell, grandson of Breed and Tomas Campbell, Mary O'Muelia's family, and of course the Campbell family from the White House. They are the grandchildren of Marie Quinn, who signed herself as Rebel Street, Swinford, when she signed the autograph books in Kilmainham. All of these women were active that day and assisted in the burial of Peter Neary. Patricia Conway is going to tell us a bit more about the events that day. But before I hand the microphone over to her, I would just like to thank Eamon Byrne, the sculptor, Peter and Michael McNicholas for giving us permission to erect the plaque here, Sergeant Petrie from Foxford Garda, who helped us earlier today. There's another important family here, Ernie Skelly and his brother and nephew. Though that family have travelled from Donegal and Longford to be with us to remember their uncle, Michael Skelly, who was killed at the Callow ambush on that very same day. So thanks very much. I'm going to hand over to Patricia now, who will tell us the story. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Now, I have to begin by saying how indebted we are to the late Michael Comer for doing his historical walks year after year. He kept the memory of Peter Neary alive. And then we're doubly indebted to Anne Leyden. She won't say anything herself, but it was she who has done such intense research on the story of the capture of Swinford. So I may be telling you the story, but it's Anne who has actually done the research on it. I'll try to be brief, but it was such a busy day in town on the 2nd of August, the fair day in 1922. The general background to it, you probably are aware of: the War of Independence, 1919 to 1921, the truce in 1921, the signing of the treaty in December 1921, the vote on the treaty in January 1922, where the pro-treaty side won that vote, but the anti-treaty side refused to go away, and there were simmering discontent for the following few months, which culminated in the attack on the Four Courts. And from then on, unfortunately, the country was in a state of all-out war. That's the general background. The particular background to this incident was the capture of Tomás O'Cathfield, one of the leading Republicans who was from Swinford, and he and 10 more were locked up in the barracks, which is the building behind you where it says the front at the gateway. That was the barracks. It literally was a military barracks because it was very well reinforced. I presume there were sandbags and everything like that, so it was a military fortress. But the other leader, important person in the Republican movement in Swinford was Tom Kearney, and he, of course, would be the father of Pádraig Kearney, the Mayo footballer, and the flying duck reference on the other side of the gateway is in reference to him. So it was a point of honour, I suppose, for Tomás Campbell to be locked up in Swinford by the Free State Army, and it was another point of honour for Thomas Kearney and his friends to attempt to release him. So full-scale plans were implemented to do that. And the nerve centre of the planning was always Nellie Campbell's house, Carabeg House, just past the parochial house on the old Castlebar Road. So the planning was very intense, and it seems to have been very sophisticated. There was much coordination between the local brigades and the outlying brigades, for example, Ballahadreen, Callow, Killasser, etc. In fact, there's a figure of 200 men mentioned in one of the reports as being involved. There was obviously intense involvement with the Cumann ladies, as Anne has already alluded to some of them. Julia Tunney and Mary O'Malley, Breach Campbell, the husband and the wife of Tomás Campbell, May Brennan, who had a boarding house just up the street beside Maurice O'Connell's. The women were always involved in intelligence gathering anyway, but she was ideally located for such an enterprise because people were always in and out to her with the news of what was happening down the town here. Nellie Groark, who later married Tom Kearney, she undertook a visit to Tomás Campbell and spoke to him in Irish and warned him of what was about to happen the next day, that an attempt was going to be made to release him, and they had no doubt that it would be a successful attempt. May Brennan, that I mentioned already, she took it upon herself to go over to the station and to cut the lines of communications between Swinford and the head general quarters of the Free State Army in Ballina. Then snipers were to be positioned on the road up to the graveyard. The houses on Brookville Avenue at the back of the barracks here were to be taken over. The first house was Monolly's, the one near the exit of the present gateway, and then the others were probably empty, but they were part of the barracks complex. The other house that was to be taken over was the one behind us here, Glebe House, which was in the perfect location. Reverend Cockle was the vicar at the time, so his house was taken over and his furniture was moved out to the front to provide a barricade. The other house that was taken over was the tall part of the gateway, which is behind you there. It was originally Mannion's house. He had been a lawyer here. Tomás Campbell had served his legal apprenticeship in that house, so he was very familiar with its layout, and it was to prove very useful. So the morning of then what became known as the capture of Swinford, everybody was in position, and obviously the Free State occupants looked out and saw that this area here was very well set up for an ambush. So negotiations seemed to have begun quite early, and obviously the Free State side seemed to have decided that it was a prudent thing to actually release Thomas Campbell and the 10 others who were imprisoned there. But the conditions of the release was that the Republicans would then leave town immediately. Well, the release happened, but the leaving of the town did not happen. And the Republicans, being so well organised, decided that the barracks was to be taken over. So the shootout began. We have no idea exactly of the timeline or what time was involved or the chronological element of it, but the shooting must have gone for quite a long time. And during that time, Peter Neary, a young volunteer, was shot dead here, just along some side along the street. And he lay there because of the gunfire come over and across from both sides, and he must have lay there for quite some time. Eventually, being as the shooting wasn't working very well, Plan B came into operation, and that was where Julia Tunney's petrol came in useful, because the Republicans entered Mannion's property, went up to the attic. At that stage there was a little window on the upper part of the roof which led onto the barracks roof. That window is closed in now, but it meant that the Republicans could get onto the roof, remove the slates, and set the building on fire. So then the occupants obviously had to come out, and they were escorted up to the Pound Field, which is between the present-day Novel Bean and the car park, on the car park side. So they were there, and sometime in that event, between the burning and the shooting, the Cumann ladies decided that really somebody had to take care of Peter Neary and his body. And Breach Campbell is said to have ordered a Free State soldier or somebody to take down a door from the barracks, bring it across, and his body was laid on it, and they brought the body over to the hospital where he would be prepared for burial. Their good friend, and good Republican friend indeed, Sister Ethnia, was in charge of the hospital, but there were no doubt that she would have a welcome for them. So Peter Neary was prepared for burial, put in the coffin, and then they brought him very hurriedly up to Kilcunduff Cemetery, where he was buried. Very speedily. There was no time for much of a ceremony, but it said that Breach Campbell did say the final prayers over him. It is also said that they had to leave very quickly because a volley of bullets was being shot at them. Then, meanwhile, the authorities had obviously heard what was happening in Swinford, and so the Free State Army came up to Swinford, but unfortunately they ran into an ambush at Callow. And there were two further fatalities there, the Michael Skelly and the Joe Traynor, there's a memory in honour of them in in Callow. We've just come from there. So, when the Free State forces arrived, then obviously the Republicans really did have to leave town this time, but not before burning the courthouse and burning the town hall. And then the prisoners in the Pound Park were released, and the Republicans left. Now, some of them didn't go far. Some of them just went to Calaster, because that's where they had come from. And the following week, on the 8th, there was another event out there, but that's a different story. So, Peter Neary, one of our members is Maura here, the Mayo Genealogy Group, and she's done a lot of research on trying to establish who Peter Neary was. Unfortunately, nobody knows for certain. He was not local. Everybody would know if he was. Neary is a very common name in the Thurlock Park, Crimlin area, so he may well have been from there. It appears he was a miner in England and that he belonged to the Liverpool Republican movement. As part, I suppose, of being the miner, he had access to the detonators that were used in the forecourts by Rory O'Connor. But by some manner or means, he ended up here, and he lost his life here. So even though his early years we don't know much about, at least in depth we know a little bit about him, and it is a good and fitting thing that he be honoured here this evening. Now, Porrick might talk some more about the role of the Campbells. I know his grave was always looked after and thought about by the Campbells, by the McNicholases, and then in later years, at Martin Mellett's behest, Patrick Brennan, they're here, did some work on it as well. So, if I've forgotten anything, Anne will continue. Okay, so hand it back to Brendan or Joe.
Thank you very much for that. Pádraig Campbell, I'd like you to come forward, please. Thank you.
Thanks. Tosna mé a Gaeilge. Ghuinneoiste, tá mé agus na daoine eile anseo anbuíoch ar fad le an ócáid seo, an ócáid speisialta, agus muile bigos don banna ceol, midfield pipe band, agus gatainn eile atá anseo inniu, agus an coiste, Joe, Brendan, agus Patricia Gatainna. Pádraig Campbell is my name, and probably some of you know me and some don't, but anyway, I have two cousins here as well from down the country, so we share the one grandfather, Thomas Campbell, Queeveen's father, and Church Street. So you've heard Patricia, I won't go into that, replay it, but basically, again, what we could find, and thanks again to Anne Lane, the amount of work that she has done here, you know, on the whole aspect. This is the third year where this history keeps getting expanded, and the fine details, as Joe was saying, you know, that like each area had its own story. Sometimes the story will never be told, but for me, reconciliation, I think, is very important, because, you know, we were earlier on down at Callow, and we laid a wreath on a memorial there at the bridge beyond Callow, small little bad bend down there, for Commandant Skelly and volunteer trainer. And Ernie Skelly and family members are here today, and I'm very honoured by his presence. And it was fitting, I think, that we were down there as well. You know, I suppose it was the rescue of my grandfather that ended up him losing his uncle and Peter Neary. 3 Irish men died that day. Martin Geraghty got badly wounded. And it's the tragedy of civil war. Because they all died for Ireland. The 3 died for Ireland. That's the thing. And it got worse. The whole thing degenerated after the death of Collins especially. And it left an awful legacy, even in the small towns. And I suppose it evolved into the political Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, all that, but those families divided and split. But I think times like this is so important for the stuff to come out. It's not like it's been tribal or anything. You have to recognise the stand that everyone took and the input that they took, that they put into the struggle for national freedom and national self-determination, which we have today, thankfully. And in time, and in a democratic fashion, hopefully the whole of Ireland will be a united country with agreement. But, you know, just sometimes small things crop up. Commandant Skelly and Thomas Campbell were actually interned in the Curragh by the British together. And maybe they didn't even know that day. Commandant Skelly probably didn't know. Thomas Campbell probably learned afterwards that the man he was in prison with was now dead. And that's the kind of thing that we have to just remember, you know, that this country was built on their sacrifices, and the women. What the women had to put up with, and Anne discovered, like so many of their deeds when they applied for the military pensions and that weren't recognised. And the country they fought for wasn't the country that they ended up with. They were put back into the scullery, and that's where they were forced to stay for decades, you know. And it's the idea, I mean, there's a lot of rights that we have today that are taken for granted, but democracy is a very precious thing, you know. But they felt so strong then that they fought for it and fought each other and families divided. So, again, we just have to honour them all. Respect, that's it. And I'll part on this one. I remember, some of you might remember, around 1967, 68, and I think with the help of the McNicholas family and Síamsa Sráide, Queeveen, my father, and others, Peter Neary's headstone was put up in Calcunduff. It was in a Campbell family plot that was where the women buried him. And Shane Campbell, years later, Mike Munley found that again. I remember the unveiling of it. and there's a photo I'm trying to find. It's there of it, that event, but I'll find it. But as if by magic, then Martin Mellett and with great support restored that just out of the blue. So it's like between Anne's work and other people's work that this man's memory has been brought back. It's like the work of early Skelly and family and others have brought back the memory of Michael Skelly and Joe Traynor, and it's to honour and respect these people. That I think that duty was given to us, and our yeshe have anam galir.
Thank you very much, Porrick. And just to, I suppose, add to what Porrick said about the three young men that died today, that died for Ireland, I'm often reminded of the haunted words that Thomas Plaque said to his wife the night before he was executed. He said that all of us going out tonight believe we have sailed the soul of Ireland, that we have struck the first successful blow to freedom. Freedom is coming, but between then and freedom, Ireland will go through hell. But Ireland will never lay down again. I never heard true words spoken, because following 1916 we had the War of Independence, and we had, of course, the tragedy of the Civil War. And that's why it's important, and there's an onus on all of us here, not just in Swinford, but the country as a whole, to always remember the sacrifices and the lives that were lost for the foundation of the Irish state. So thank you all, one and all. And now I'm going to invite Bernie Henry to come over here and to unveil the plaque, and I'm going to ask Michael to please escort her. Thank you. Bernie is the daughter of Julia Tunney, who was in action during the capture of Swinford, and she's also the niece of Lieutenant Thomas McNicholas, who was also killed in May 1923. And now I'm going to ask Father Clement to officially bless the flag.
Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth. Almighty God, you have allowed us the making of the pictures, images, and statues of those who sacrificed themselves for the good of their people and for the glory of your name. We ask you, Lord, to bless this plaque unveiled in honor of Peter Neary, who courageously offered his life for the good of his people, of his community and his nation. Grant, Lord, that as we honor him today and look upon this plaque, we may be inspired with courage to save our people, to preserve the values of our community. May we, this day and always, know the peace and the freedom for which Peter and others like him gave up their lives. We ask you this through Christ our Lord.
Thank you, Father Clement, for that. I asked Belinda Cook, who is a native of Swinford, and to put together a poem for this evening. It's called Etched in Stone. Who owns the bullet hole? Who fired the shot? Who felt it go home? Who owns the shot on the stone of its Swinford house. Everyone knows who owns the bullet holes on Dublin's GPO. 100 years have placed them deeper in our history. But you have to look close. Please take notice next time. As you walk our little town, Peter Neary owns the shop that made its mark in stone. That's for you, Peter. And now I invite all of you to join me in a minute's silence to all those men, women and children on all sides who died in the struggle for Irish freedom.
Ready, fighters. The national anthem. Rolls. 1, 2.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us for part 1 of this special Síamsa Sráide launch. And I just want to finish up by mentioning 2 names who are not with us, but they're always in our mind, especially when we were doing historic events here in Swinford, and that is Michael Comer and Maureen Murphy. So thank you all, one and all, and we invite you all to join us up in the White House for the official launch of the Síamsa Sráide portrait. Thank you.
Jerry, how are you? Thanks so much. I appreciate that. I love Jerry. Pipes up. I'm watching. I'm dealing with every bit. Thanks, Jerry, and appreciate it. Right, lads. Wearing of the green.
Right. Ready, fighters. The wearing of the green. Drums and pipes. By the right, quick march.